Hello and welcome to something very different, I guess. Today I'm going to be covering healthy hobby habits. They're a bit basic, but they're ones I think that are still something good for people to at least consider. And I'll open up on a small comment on the Trench Crusade. I was actually planning over the last couple weeks and months to cover Trench Crusade, and I'd been doing a little bit of research on it, and I was waiting for the next Kickstarter before I really did anything. But with the way the 21 magazine treated a number of people that weren't actually interested in the game instead of a bunch of bad actors, and the fact that they were mostly supported by the people creating Trench Crusade, I'm pretty much not going to touch the game at all in any reasonable manner in regards of talking unless something changes. This degree of disrespect towards the customer is, or especially a potential customer, is just too stupid for something to really drag itself out of. But hey, who knows? So let's talk about the first topic. And I'm just going to call it avoid buying all the toys. Or more effectively, avoid buying all the tools is really what it is. This may sound odd, but when you initially get into any hobby, try avoiding jumping into the deep end. By this, I mean don't buy a bunch of tools, equipment, whatnot until you've figured out a few things about the hobby itself. With time, you'll gain knowledge, and with that, you'll be able to know exactly what you need, will use, and won't use at all. For example, mold line cleaners can be handy, but you can quickly find out you can do a lot of this with a hobby knife. Let it settle as you figure out if it's something you want to pursue. It's often easy to get caught up in the heat of excitement and make a bad call. We've all done it at one point in time. There's no shame in that. Just avoid letting that excitement cost you for something that you might actually not enjoy in the long run, or heck, even the short run after your excitement's run out. You can see this with a lot of Kickstarters where people get really excited about the number of things they're going to get, and then they never ever actually play the thing that they got or use it in any way. No reason to buy all the brushes, paints, pads, expensive things when it might turn out you just don't enjoy it, or you find out you just don't want those things even if you stay in it. Within wargaming, I'd suggest avoiding the hell out of buying big boxes of miniatures, giant sets of paint, or oddly display cases. In one case, I knew a guy who bought a number of display cases long before he had painted, built, or even played a game. He just went out and bought them, and he could never explain why. He just got caught up with these grandiose ideas, and then he found out that one, he didn't like the game really that much. He didn't like building the miniatures that much. He didn't like painting them really, and in the long run, his wife forced him to pay to sell all the display cases. And this is before they were more common to get, so you had to actually kind of order them in a lot of cases, or get them from store clearances and things like that. Now, you could have got them in other ways, but at the time it was a lot harder because the internet wasn't as wide for purchasing. So we'll move on to the next topic. Actually enjoy it. Now, I know that sounds a bit simplistic, but you'd be surprised the amount of people who get into a hobby and they don't actually consider if they enjoy the hobby. And in retrospect, sometimes you just might not enjoy changes to it. You might not enjoy new additions. Maybe you don't enjoy certain facets of the hobby. It's about figuring these things out. And I'm going to cover that a little bit here. In that case, one of the big things I would definitely suggest is once you've figured out a hobby you're interested in and you've started to get yourself immersed into it, one thing is always to figure out what is the thing you enjoy the most, and is it going to be worth your time? Is it going to be something you indulge in here and there or whatnot? So, using wargaming as an example, there are a lot of people who enjoy simply collecting, building, and painting the miniatures. Now, if you're talking Games Workshop, there's a lot of people who do not enjoy the building process of Games Workshop, and a lot of people who do not enjoy painting them. But there is that element, is just because you enjoy something doesn't mean that you're necessarily into all the other facets of that hobby. And that can be true just about anything. Some people enjoy watching sports, and other people enjoy playing sports. But, the type of sport you might enjoy playing and or watching is going to be different and depend on what you find most appealing. And a lot of people will simply give in to peer pressure. Maybe, for example, using wargaming, I've seen plenty of people who played Warhammer because they simply didn't understand or know that other games existed. And in a lot of cases, they did it more because it was what their group was doing. Same with D&D or just about anything. Going and watching a movie because everybody else does, but you're not that interested. In the long term, it will be important if you know what you enjoy in a hobby and if you enjoy the hobby. It'll save you a whole lot of heartbreak in the end. And honestly, you can forgive something if you don't enjoy it that much if you enjoy the people that you're gaming with or you're hobbying with or spending time with, but it will grind on you eventually. So you should probably figure out what it is you like the most and stick with that. That doesn't mean you can't tip your toes out into other elements, but I've seen a surprising number of people who engage in hobbies of all sorts, or in activity really, and they hate it. They hate everything about it. And they only do it because it seems like the only thing similar to what they're interested in, the only thing that the people that they like or know are willing to do, or just because they simply don't know what else to do. And that's always sad to see. But when you're involved in something, if you're trying something, one of the key factors is don't waste your time in it if you're not enjoying it. It's not worth your limited time on this earth to spend it with things you don't like or hate. That doesn't mean don't go to the dentist, but it means when you're doing something for leisure or an entertainment factor, don't waste your time with something you hate. Go to something you actually care about. And anyone who wants to bring that down from you, push them out. Not to be mean to them, not to mean that they can't partake in something, but it means don't waste your time with them. And that's the best advice I can give you there. So let's move on to the next section.
Part 3. Your group. There's a well-known old adage of know thy enemy, yet to know thy ally is equally important. When it comes to healthy hobby habits, from miniatures wargaming to pen and paper RPGs like Pathfinder, the importance of this idea gets overlooked or ignored more often than it should. With the rise in popularity of RPG horror stories, it should be more apparent than ever that getting involved with disingenuous, dishonest, or just plain bad players can destroy any group. Nothing can ruin a campaign or break up a wargame quicker than somebody who can't stop picking fights over politics or is trying to bully other players to get their way. Desperation can make for strange allegiances, and sometimes gaming hobbies have a similar issue. If you live in an area where gaming isn't popular, there are no hobby stores, or all anyone plays is D&D, you've probably experienced this. Just because it's common, it doesn't mean it's a good idea or it's always going to work out. Even with limited resources, you should have a good idea of what you will and won't put up with in your own hobby. Many of us get precious little time and money to indulge in our hobbies, and there's few things worse than that one person who thinks they can do whatever they like. You should absolutely have some notion of what is and what isn't acceptable to you when you join or form a group. You should be willing to make a compromise for others, but you shouldn't let others walk all over you just because you want to keep a group together. If you have one player who keeps causing trouble and won't compromise with others, it's time to consider if either they or you need to find another table to play at. Yeah, it may take longer or be more difficult to find another group that's a better fit, but it's 100% better than being frustrated or discouraged from a hobby that you should be enjoying.
Part 4. Pacing and avoiding burnout. Now, these might seem self-explanatory and on the face of it, but they're not really, because I've seen a lot of people over the years, and I've been around a hobby for at least 30-odd years at this point, come in and have pacing problems and have burnout because of it. So in the case of pacing, there's two ways this usually goes. You have people who go too hard into the paint, and people who get intimidated by the sheer magnitude of what they're facing and never start, and therefore burn out that way. In the case of people who they go too hard into the thing, is that the habit is that like for example, you have on YouTube a number of videos that are like, can I build and paint this army in 24 hours? One of the dumbest, most obnoxious videos to have introduced to people who aren't familiar with the hobby. And not to say anything bad about those creators, because I don't know most of them, but the fact is that it's very not helpful. And the stupid way to say that. But it doesn't help when somebody just kind of throws themselves in and goes as hard as they can, because what happens usually is it turns into tedium. It turns into a pain. It becomes torture in a manner of speaking, as my cat goes nuts in the background. Effectively, it becomes an uphill battle that wears down their enjoyment and becomes kind of something that they dread, which doesn't help, especially when you're dealing with, here's 100 guys of infantry to put together. Here is the tedium of wiring this thing. Here is X, Y, or Z. The doing the warm-ups, doing the exercises just to do a sport in some cases. Heck, it could be something as simple as if you are a gun collector cleaning the gun. You might not even actually enjoy that action. But the greater point is, those people tend to go too hard, and then the hobby becomes associated with feelings of dread and suffering and drudgery, and it makes them not want to do it, and that's usually how a lot of people burn out. Now, the other end of it, I will relate to some guys I knew. There was a guy who, he didn't like doing a lot of, repetitive actions, and he avoided it as much as possible. Most famously, he showed up to games claiming to be using a Tau army with Gunpla pasted to cardboard cutouts. A lot of people would say, oh, well, he's very clearly trying to be cheap in terms of trying to play the most overpowered units because it's hard to... No, he actually wrote down what was on these different units. He just didn't want to build anything. And then he didn't build the Gundams. He bought them off a friend of his who had built them. And he looked at learning the rules, building the models, painting as all this overwhelming act, and he put less and less and less into things, and to the point where he just simply gave up on it and didn't want to even be involved in that hobby because it was just too much for him to even consider taking that first baby step. So this is how I generally handle things. And this is not a way that's going to get something done in a super fast time. What I would do when I got a box of infantry is I would go, okay, I'm going to build 1 or 2 guys every night, and then that's all I'm going to do until they're all built. Once they were all built, then I would line them up, and depending on what they were for, like if you're doing, let's go with zombies. Let's say you have a bunch of zombies, you've built all those miniatures, even if you got like come on Zombicide, and you line them up. And what I would do is I'd go, okay, well, I'm going to have 3 or 4 basic colors I'm going to put on all the miniatures. And I would just go, well, tonight I'm going to put all the greens on these guys. Or, whatever colors you picked, just using green at the moment. And then, for example, if I was painting clothes or shoes or hats, I would change up what item got that color. But though X amount of guys, let's say 5, I would do that base coat on 5 guys. Put them aside, let them dry. The next night, I'd do another 5 guys, another 5 guys, another 5 guys, until I had finished that base coating. It's not fast, but I went, hey, look, between my responsibilities, between the things I need to get done, and the amount of time I have for leisure, this was the most suitable way for me to handle it. So, like I'd say, there are ways to handle it. You just have to find out what works best for you. The hardest step is always the first one. And don't let things like the Heavy Metal Team's paint job or some YouTuber that you will never ever meet that does some stunning, insane thing be what deters you. Just take those little baby steps and try not to put yourself in a situation where the amount of stuff you need to get done is overwhelming to the amount of time and effort you are capable of putting into it. So, let's move on to the next section. Part 5, Knowing Your Limits. Now, this is related to the last section, but I thought it was warranted enough to put into its own section. And I'm going to say this. When I was talking about how I handled burnout and, well, avoiding burnout more than handling burnout, the thing is, I figured that out over a long period of time. I did know some old heads and I got some tips, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to the individual, and you have to kind of experiment and figure out what you can and cannot do and what you can get done in a certain amount of time. Now, I worked in a number of industries where you ended up on your own and you had to figure out how to get something done in a certain amount of time, so that did help to a degree. And the thing is, just using, we'll go with gunpla, wargaming, painting, but this can apply to anything, especially if you are a runner. You should know your limits fairly quickly. You got to test them and know where they are so that you don't hurt yourself. Within these different hobbies, knowing your limits has different meanings, but always comes down to the same thing. What can you reasonably achieve in a given time? And within that given time, what can you get done so that you can enjoy it? And that sounds a little redundant, but first part of that, I'd say, when you are especially doing any one of these hobbies, how much can you reasonably play? How much time do you reasonably have to put to this thing? And do you have a lot of free time? Do you have a little? How much can you personally tolerate within that time period? How much can you reasonably manage? So in wargaming concerns, or at least perspectives, how many guys can you get built in a night before it just becomes dull and a drudgery? That doesn't mean that you don't have those occasional nights where you just go all in and get as much built and done as possible because you want to get you want to add that extra unit or something for that next game. No, within your leisure time, what are you capable of pacing in regards to how many guys can I build? How long will it take me to build that many guys that I need? How long will it take me to paint them? And how much time will I have to dedicate to the play of the game, if that's the part you enjoy, if you're not one of the people who likes to collect, build, and paint. And even then, you should know how many you can get done in a reasonable amount of time. The one key I'd always say is, before you buy something like one of those big Games Workshop boxes or a massive Kickstarter, is, will I reasonably get that done in the next 3, 6 to 12 months? Will that even get done in the next 2 years? And those are good questions before you allow yourself to invest in something, time-wise or money-wise. You do not want to fling yourself into a situation where you have all of this stuff sitting there in a pile that you know you most likely will never ever get to. I had a friend who had a room full of D&D 3rd edition books. He'd buy them almost religiously when they came out, and at that time they came out monthly, and in some cases multiple monthly. And I remember asking him, how much use are you going to get out of those books in the next year, in the next 2 years, in the next 5, 10? Will you still be playing the system to gain some use out of it? Now, there are arguments. I do actually keep a number of old RPG books and old codexes and such, because I think they have value. But there's a point at which you have the argument of, well, are you ever going to use that item? Is there a reason for you to have it because you're going to make use of it? Now, if you're just collecting, cool, great, awesome. But in his case, he just kind of instinctively purchased these. And when I talked to him about it, he did stop. And we had a conversation, and reasonably, he got rid of about 80-70% of it, if I recall right. And he had a pretty big stack of books left, let's just say. When I say know your limits and avoid buying and pacing and actually enjoy it, and of course Farvifian Guard's point as well, this all culminates in the fact that you have limited time. You don't have every second in the world. You have responsibilities. You have things to do. There might be other things entertainment-wise calling you. So the most important thing outside actually liking what you're doing, when you're going to put your time into something like a hobby or entertainment, is knowing your limit. And I've had to look at a number of things and go, I am never going to get to that project even if I like it. I've never built an Eldar army because I've always had a bunch of other elements on the back burner. A lot of other projects, a lot of other hobbies that I've had to figure out how much time I can spend in each. And by knowing what you can reasonably achieve will be a cornerstone of any element of anything you do. But it will especially be the king of not wasting your money. And once you don't have that FOMO, the fear of missing out mindset, and you don't feel like you have to hoard it all, it is quite freeing. Now, as a little extra bonus, I'd also say always try something out before you make a purchase if you can. Be it a war game, a sport, a video game. Always give that free option a try and see if that's something that you'll actually enjoy. Then make the most minimum purchase you can and see if you continue to enjoy it, and then you can start investing in it. I know these were kind of basic, and I wanted them to be kind of universal in a sense, because I've noticed there's a lot of younger people I run into who have no idea about some of these because they don't have the experience. Not to say they're stupid or anything. And on top of it, we had a bit of a family kerfluffle and some health crisis came up. So I'm sorry I wasn't able to put my usual effort into this, but I did try to do as much as I could within the time. So, hey, next time we'll see what else we can come up with, and have a lovely day.